Kristen, I am seriously so excited to talk with you. I know we had just previously talked about how much spirituality mindset goes into business. And today we're really wanting to talk to the pet business owner who lately maybe their business is running their life and that's not necessarily what they signed up for. They're working crazy hours. They want to build a life that can support their dream life. And I think that you've been such a huge champion of that, which is why I love that we get to talk about this today. So thank you so much for being here and willing to share.
Oh, I'm just thrilled to be here. And I'm happy for you that you have a podcast and that people get to experience your voice in the world
Well,
and the magic that you create.
thank you.
Yeah.
That means a lot, especially coming from you. I appreciate that. I'd love to hear a little bit more about your journey as a pet
Mhm.
business coach and how you built that life that allows you to travel. I remember we talked last time, and I know you got
Mhm.
to travel while having your pet care business, I think to Bali, right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right. In
I
India. Yeah.
Okay. I'd love to just hear like
Yeah.
how you were able to do that. Just a little
Yeah.
story.
I, well, it really started with my mindset because my business was quite large. I had many, many staff members, like over, at that point, I had probably 25 pet sitters and dog walkers. I had a couple managers, and I had a shed next to my house that had stuff in it. It was a storage space. And I went in there one day and I saw my travel backpack like sitting in the corner. It was a backpack I had used many years before to travel through Europe, and I had used it to go on my first adventure. Yeah, travel adventure, and I felt this sadness. It was like, it hit me like, "Oh my gosh, I have a business now." I can't do that. That's what came, was that thought of like, that dream, that ship has sailed. That dream is over. You have a business now. I didn't know anyone who had a business, let alone a pet care business, which in my mind involved like kind of 24/7. Even though I had managers and staff, I was still really hands on in the business. So, I was working many hours, even though I had all these people working for me. And yeah, and then something else happened shortly after that, which was a friend of mine was planning a trip to go away for 2 months. And I felt really jealous. And I've learned that jealousy is like a wink from my psyche of like, that's something you want. Is there a way to create that? Like, if you're feeling jealous, it's a dream, it's a desire. How can you, I've said this, like my inner self was like, how can you create that, Kristen? And I immediately talked back to that voice, that still small voice. Like, I have a business, it's a big business. There's no way, like, what would my clients think if I went away? And, that voice talked back to me, like, why not? And then it was like, well, I don't know anybody that's done this. So what? Be the first. Like, you know, don't use that as an excuse. If it's something that you want, find a way to create it. And so I let that thought simmer for a little while, for a few weeks. It just kind of simmered. It was like, It was kind of like that, why not? Which is such a great, like, question. Like, why not? Or a great phrase. It's like, why not me? You know, why not you? Why not? Why not travel for a few months? So I let it percolate for a while. And then I thought, what if I ask my manager, like my main manager, if she would be willing to hold down the fort for me? Like, I felt like what's the first step that I would need to do? It would be to either hire somebody to help me or see amongst my current staff who could manage it, because being away out of country, it just isn't possible. And so I gathered my courage And I got on the phone with her and I said, I have a question to ask you. I'm considering traveling for, I don't know, maybe like 2, 3, 4 months. Would you be interested in, managing the business if I did that? We can talk about what it would look like, and, there may be a way that I can give you like a percentage of the earnings during that time as a way to compensate the extra work, like you being me essentially. And she said, "Let me think about it." And then she said, "I'll call you tomorrow." And she called me the next day and said, "Yeah, I'm interested." And so we hammered it out. I gave her a percentage. I also reached out to the second manager to see if she would be available to be kind of the backup. It's like I really needed to be honest and transparent with my managers of like, this is what I want. How can I make it worth your while to help me achieve this goal? And they both said yes. And I immediately booked a non refundable ticket for 9 months from that date because I knew that it would probably take about that length of time to be able to get everybody on board, all my 25 staff members, the two managers, because they were managing, but I was still doing so much of the admin work. And so it took like, and I had to get my life in order too. Like when you're traveling for that length of time, there's like big and small details. Like, what do you do with your car? Somebody needs to start that car periodically, right? If you're going to be gone for a while. I decided to rent out my house as a way to, you know, provide some income while I was gone. And so that was something that I did. And so there are just a lot of details. So I made a list of all the things that I would need to do. And then there, of course, there were things I didn't even know I needed to do that kind of revealed themselves. And so I went away. I went to Bali and India. And originally I was only going to be away for 4 months. Actually, that's right. So for the first trip, I did a second trip. So for the first trip, I was going to be gone for 4 months. And then I ended up being gone for like 6 months. I reached out like at month 3 and said, would you guys be okay managing like another month and then another month and then another month? And then I came back and then I asked them, would you be willing to do it again? I want to go away for a longer period of time. And so that was about maybe 10 months after that, I went away again. And that was, I think that time was like 7 or 8 months. Yeah. And the wild thing about that is that, and this is like completely mind blowing when you think about it. And when I think about it, I made more money not working than I had working.
That was going to be my next question is
Yeah.
what were the
So
findings?
how did I do that? So one of the ways that I did that was, I compensated my managers. I gave them a percentage of the earnings, and they were really motivated to say yes to a lot of business. Um, One of my main manager even hired while I was gone because we lost a dog walker. And so that was something she was able to do. And also I subleased my house. So I was able to rent out my house. And the places that I went were very low cost. So I was able to have a pretty wonderful lifestyle in spite of, having less money coming in. I ended up making more because I had, my house money coming in. And, it was a real adjustment though. A lot of people say, I want to have a lot of time. But the thing is, if you're working a lot, especially if you've been working a lot for a long time, it is very hard to go from 60 to 0. Like 0 to 60 is a lot easier in my mind, and with a lot of the pet business owners that I've coached that have either done this or want to do it or who have to stop for whatever reason. I've had women who are pregnant with their first baby reaching out to me, setting up coaching, saying, I need to figure this out. I cannot be working for a period of time. I need a maternity leave. How do I do that? And so part of what I'm working with them on is not only whether they're traveling or they're having a kid or they just need to take a break, right? Whatever it is, it's like get used to having little pockets of time that aren't structured now. Because if you come to a screeching halt, you're going to be anxious. I promise you. It's going to feel really weird because you've been working so much. And also, when we're working a lot, work can be a real addiction.
Mhm.
It can be, there's a lot of reward that comes. It's very valued in society, like, oh, you're busy or you work hard. There's a lot of gratification from that, but there's also a lot of damage that gets done to our spirit. It's the cost of workaholism.
Mhm.
And so being able to be comfortable with unstructured time, even little bits of it, will help prepare you for having larger periods of time. And it's just, I can't emphasize that enough. Like, it is really important.
Yeah, it's something that you don't really think about too. And
Yeah.
ahead of time, you're like, I want all the free time in theory, right?
Yeah.
And then you
Uh
get there, you're
huh.
like, "Okay."
Well, we often, I'm saying we because, I've coached a lot of people who have shared this with me and I've done it myself. Maybe you have too, or your listeners, where it's like if you're working a lot for a long period of time, there are probably a lot of feelings that have had to be shoved down. A client upsets you, a friend hurts you, you know, your partner disappoints you. It's like, but you have to show up for your work, right? And so
Mhm.
you shove, shove, shove. And maybe you're numbing with substances, drinking, eating, working is a substance. And it's like there comes a point where you have to deal with that. And we can't always deal with things as they come up. It's just impossible, especially if we're working. But it's really important to find ways to be able to discharge those feelings, to talk to a friend, to deal with them as they come, because what can happen if you've been working a lot and then all of a sudden you're not working is that these feelings come up. And you're like, oh my God, I wanted to enjoy myself. What the heck is happening here? And it's like, well, it's like a pressure cooker, right? You put things down enough, they have to come out. And so the more you create space within like a day to just process and deal with things, the more you're going to be able to actually enjoy that time when you do take it, whether it be a sabbatical or a trip or having time with your brand new baby,
Yeah.
whatever you're you know, taking that time for, you'll be able to actually more fully enjoy it.
Yeah, that's really good advice. I'm glad you brought that up. I'm curious for those, I imagine that a good amount of our listeners maybe have a team that are doing, you know,
Mhm.
they have staff that do dog walking and pet sitting for them, but maybe they don't have systems, processes,
Yeah.
managers. Like what's the first step to find those pockets of time in your business to like do that slowly rather than just going from 60 to 0?
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's a good question. Well, let me think about that. Like, how did I do it? I mean, I did schedule time with myself, so I wouldn't even start work till, like, 10. That was me, because mornings are really sacred for me. It's when I do a morning practice called Morning Pages, which is a Julia Cameron Artist's Way practice of writing 3 pages in the journal of just free writing. And that's where I can release and get things out. I don't always meditate, but sometimes I do. I often go on a walk in the morning before work, like a pretty solid, like 45, 50-minute walk, or I do hot yoga or something. I'm doing some kind of exercise. And so all of that can help. So you can find times that actually work for you. So let's say, you know, I wanted to do that and mornings didn't work for me. Well, evenings might not be ideal for me to do that. So where can I put it in my schedule if mornings don't work? Or a question you might want to ask yourself, dear listener, is like, where do I have little pockets of time? And, a lot of people advocate for waking up early, especially if they have kids. And I'm not actually a big advocate for that because I know how important sleep is, especially for a very busy business owner. And so there may be ways, like those of you who have staff, to, if you maybe you want to have a manager or one of your staff members check email, phone messages, and just to kind of tide you over until you're able to actually start in the morning. But, for some people, evenings are really their jam. Like that's their night owls, and that's when they get a lot done and they actually thrive at night, or that's when their practices would be best to really connect to themselves. So I really think the first step is looking at like, when would it be most valuable for me? Individually, it's not what somebody else says, but what do I think for me? When is my potent time? And what I've realized is when I give that time away in the morning, whether that be a phone call with a friend or, you know, some work thing, that's a sacrifice. Like I have sacrificed a part of myself because that time is sacred. So now what I do is there's a very firm boundary. Like I just don't typically, occasionally I will, like I have a coaching client who could only, work with me at a certain time and she really needs help right now. And so I made a conscious decision of like, every other week I'm getting up I'm ending my morning practice a little bit early. Not getting up early. I'm ending my morning practice early so that I can work with her. But I thought about it long and hard, you know? So anytime you have a sacred time for you, whether that be time with friends, your family, yourself, we can be so easy as humans to like put a client there because it's money, right? But there's a cost to that. It's important to look at like the cost that comes. And what I have found is when I make time for myself, first and then stack things around that, my life works. It just does. It's like, but when I don't, I feel a little wonky, a little ungrounded. So, if you're not putting yourself first, at least for a little bit each day, why not? What's holding you back? What do you think is holding you back? And it might be like my travel thing, right? That came up like my business is too big to travel. Well, that's a lie. That's a figment of my imagination. That block is in my mind only. And if I had believed it, I would not be here to tell you about the travels that I did. And I would not have set that up. And so part of it is we tell ourselves lies sometimes and so looking at like, is that true? Is it true that I don't have enough time? Am I afraid of connecting with myself? Am I afraid of like stopping this quick pace and what might come up if I do that?
Right. And then I guess, like, looking at that tangibly in terms of, okay, if I'm taking, setting aside however much time, 30 minutes,
Yeah. Yep.
an hour of that time, but now there's tasks, that I need to, work
Yeah.
later or whatever. So how do you start to kind of like, is that something that you would hire a manager for? Like, how do you start to take those first action steps in the business to make sure the same things are getting done or more is getting done,
Yes.
but you're still, slowly removing
Well,
yourself.
yeah, what I would say is it'd be good to write a job description of all the tasks that you do in your business. And then next to those tasks, write which ones you enjoy and which ones you're good at. Typically, those are one and the same because usually we enjoy things we're good at. Not always, but usually. And then also on that list, I would write whether you think you could delegate that fairly easily or not. That would be the first thing, delegate easily. And then maybe it's not going to be easy, but you could delegate it. That would be another thing to put on. So that you're beginning to kind of do surgery on your business, right? You're looking at the various parts of your business and how you can begin to get support, help, lighten your load. And if you're noticing as you're making this list that you don't have anything that you can delegate or you have very few things, then it may be a control issue. Or you may be like a perfectionist where you feel like you wouldn't be able to hire somebody who could do as good of a job as you. And I would recommend that you question that thought. You know, it can be humbling to realize as a business owner, especially one that's been in business for a long time, to realize that you could be replaceable. And so we have to get our ego out of it, right? In order to create more time and space and freedom. I mean, some people are really good at that. I was not one of those people, honestly. I was like, I don't want to let go. They won't be able to do as good of a job. And, all of the fears that came up. My clients are used to me. So much of business, like so much of a lack of delegation is making excuses. So I recommend question the excuses. Is that true? If there was a way that I could do X, how might I do it? That can be a way to kind of pry open the control door in our psyche.
Yeah.
You know? Yeah. Get over ourselves. Like,
Mhm.
maybe you are replaceable, and maybe that is a great thing. Maybe
Mhm.
you will finally have a life. You know, for me, I was single for many years when I had my business. I mean, I had relationships periodically for like a year or two, but I didn't get married. I wanted that, but I, and then I was single for periods of time. And it was like, I realized I had invested so much of my energy and attention in my business that there was nothing left for a partner. And so I had to really look at that. Like, if my life, you've heard of feng shui,
Mhm.
it's like the art of placement of things and making space for things and being intentional about things in the space to create more of what you want. If my life, if I was looking at my life from a feng shui perspective, there was no room for a partner. And even in my bedroom, like in terms of feng shui, I had a very small bedroom. I had one nightstand on one side, my side. So I consciously moved. This isn't about business, but there might be listeners who are like, oh my gosh, I want a partner. You know, well, how's your bedroom looking? Is there space in your closet for a partner's clothes? Is there a second nightstand next to your bed with a light? Would it be comfortable for your partner to be there in your bedroom? Um, and to look at your life. Like, where do I have time to date? Where do I have time to actually create a rich and fulfilling life? Work is not like having a rich and fulfilling life if that's all you're doing.
Yeah. And it's funny because that's typically what people why they start businesses is because they want
I
freedom.
know.
Isn't that funny
It's
how that works?
so crazy, and then they become workaholics,
Mhm.
and they're
Yeah.
working all the time, and it's because they're not questioning their behavior and their thoughts.
Mhm.
They have just gotten into the rat race of business ownership. And for me, when I was considering traveling, I was like, I know no one who has both time and money as a business owner. They either have a lot of time and not a lot of money or clients, or they have a lot of clients and money, but not a lot of time. And I was and am committed to creating a life that is both,
Mhm.
because that to me is success. And I was thinking success as a business owner is having lots of clients and money. But then the older I got and the more I did business, I was like, this is not, I am not successful. Maybe everybody around me thinks I'm successful, but that doesn't, it feels good a little bit to have other people think we're successful, but it doesn't really satisfy that deep inner need of having a life and having a business.
Mhm.
And it
Yeah.
can be, we can get swept up in it because society is like, an Instagram and like, oh, that one's successful. It's just stop comparing. Like, do you feel successful? How's your life looking these days? You know, yes, you're investing a lot of time, money, and energy in your business, but is your life in a desert? And
Yeah.
how can you begin to water those things that will begin to create the flourishing?
Yeah. It seems like there's that feast and famine cycle too, where it's like, well, if
Huge.
I take away from my business, then that means
Uh-huh.
clients are gonna go away or,
Yeah, yeah,
how are these things gonna get done if I'm not
yeah,
doing them? So I know you said, getting that list, right, where you're saying what
yeah.
would be easy to delegate, what would be, so how do
Mhm.
you have that list?
Yes, and
What's
so look at it and look at what's the simplest thing you can delegate. Don't start with the super hard thing that you hate doing, because you wanna start small, especially if you have resistance to delegating. So it might be, I am going to delegate my morning calls and emails. I'm going to hire somebody, one of my current staff members. That would be ideal because they know your business, to check email and phone. They can reach you in the event of an emergency, but that's it. Otherwise, sacredness. you know? And then creating like a phone and an email log. Like they have returned the call, they've said, the business owner will be in touch with you soon. I mean, that's a good first step. Eventually, you can train them to actually schedule whatever services you offer, to set up, let's say you're a pet sitting company or a dog training company, to set those clients up with a dog trainer or a pet sitter, pet groomer. But, start small and then that will begin to boost you like, oh my gosh, I created some time for myself. It's like, risk and reward, especially if it's difficult for you to delegate. Once you see that it's working, that is going to motivate and inspire you to keep doing it. And I would begin numbering it like, okay, what's next hard? What's the next hardest thing? What's the next hardest thing? And then just go through it. And, you may need help with it. Call a business coach. Like, why are you doing it alone? Get help. If your business is struggling because you don't have a good website, that would be good to call you, Michaela. It's like, get the help that you need.
Mhm.
It can speed up the process,
Yeah. And
you
it seems like
know?
it's nice because that was one of the questions I was actually going to ask you is, all right, now we need to find a manager, that sort of thing. But it actually
Uh-huh.
takes the pressure off to look at who you currently have on your team and see if
Absolutely.
that's awesome. That saves a lot of time in the process too. And you already like and trust this person.
Exactly. I would not, if you have staff, start with your staff members. And that's another thing, like making a numbered list. Like, this would be my first choice for a manager or an assistant, right? This would be my second choice, and then go down the line. Like some of those people who, let's say, are pet care providers or dog trainers, not everybody who works with pets is good with people or organized in that way that is required for returning calls, responding to emails. It takes a special skill set to be able to do both. Like, you as an owner likely have that skill set, but you not all of your staff members will. So the way you can begin to look at, is this person potentially a good fit as a manager or as my assistant, phone assistant, email assistant? You can look at, how do they communicate? Do they communicate well? How's their spelling? Like, that is really important if they're returning emails, right? In terms of professionalism and all of that. Are they quick to respond to messages when you reach out to them? That's gonna be important too, their response level. Um, are they friendly? I mean, I've worked with some pet business owners that have main managers who, they're calling me and saying, "I've got a main manager that is really, like clients don't really enjoy working with them. They're they're difficult personalities." And I'm like, let's talk about why you hired that person so that you don't recreate that mistake again. Because what you don't want is an assistant or a manager being like a barbed welcome mat. It's not a welcome mat if there's barbed wire around, right?
Mhm.
You want somebody that actually is going to increase your business. Also, I would be looking at training that person in how to sell your services. And that's a fine art. And, that's not something to do right away. It's not even something to do like within 2 months of, having them manage or assist with you. But it would be something to look at maybe 4 or 5 months down the road when you realize this is somebody that I wanna continue working with, and have them expand what they're doing with my company.
When you're first starting this then, is that something where, say they're gonna be fielding phone calls or something like that in the morning, like, is that something where you should record, like, a video? I don't know if familiar with Loom, but, like, recording
Uh-huh.
screen share and say, "This is my process." Maybe you record a few
Yep.
mornings and then share that with
Absolutely.
them?
Yep, yep, and I would have them shadow too. So, when you're delegating, the first step is I show you. The second step is you show me. The third step is you do it alone, right? So, what I did is I had my managers, you know, accompany me, not in my office, but on Zoom. Like, okay, I'm returning calls now. I'm going to put you on mute. I'm going to let you listen to me. There's something very powerful about osmosis, being around something that's happening. We can only learn so much from like a manager manual, and that is something that I would recommend, you know, creating for your business. I have one that, people have bought that have edited, but you can create your own. But to really look at, like, people learn in different ways. And so I recommend having like a written list. I recommend having them shadow you. I recommend, like you said, recording a video. Um, Also doing role playing, so having them be a client and you work with them as you're the owner and they're the client, and you're teaching them through that. They get to be the client first, which is much easier, right? They're not put on the spot. But then you're going to switch gears. Okay, now you be the manager, I'll be the client. And then you can gently correct them as you go. And it's really important to be gentle with corrections because, for you as the business owner, it's probably pretty easy. You're used to your job, second nature to you. You could, at this point, probably do it in your sleep. Not so with a manager. Also, they are going to take perhaps twice as long to do things in the first year. And so you're gonna be paying more for that, but eventually they're gonna be able to, get that skill set and it's gonna come much more quickly. But it's gonna be important for you to allow, like, double time and to not expect them to be as quick as you are because they just won't be. They're learning a new skill. Takes time.
Yeah, absolutely. And then I
Mhm,
guess from that, we talked about, okay, we have the list of what to delegate. We have the, SOPs that show them how they shadow.
mhm.
We've gone through that training process. At what point, do you know you're
That
ready?
they're ready to go, yeah.
Yeah, like how do
Well,
you know that?
one of them is, like, I feel it, like, I've done the role playing and I'm feeling it. They're quoting me prices, "How much would it be for this? How much would it be for that?" It's, like, rolling off their tongue. Um, that's how I know, but when I'm very first hiring them to do this, all I'm having them do is check email and phone. That is, like, part 1 of the managing. Because I want them to get a sense of what's happening in the business. They already know as, a pet sitter, a dog walker, a dog trainer, a pet groomer, but now we're expanding what they're learning. And so they initially are not scheduling things at all. They're not selling anything, they're simply gathering information and responding and saying, let's say, for example, Kristin, the owner, will be in touch with you later today. She's out of the office, and I just want you to know that I got your message, I got your email. And that is so important. Like the quicker you can respond to messages, ideally within 24 hours, or even more ideally within like 12 hours, the more likely you are to get that client. The longer you wait, people have very short attention spans these days. And a lot of pet business owners have difficulty returning client calls or emails. It's just, I see it over and over, and it costs them a
Mhm.
lot of business. So it can be really worth it to train someone to just respond. People want to be heard. That was such a big thing when I had my business. Like people would call me and clients and they'd say, I called these 5 pet businesses and they never called me back. What is up? And I said, "I know, it's kind of a deficiency that we have in this particular industry, and it really needs to stop." Like, people deserve even a simple email of like, "I'm so sorry, I'm booked up," or a quick call, "I'm so sorry, I'm booked up." If you
Yeah.
don't have a referral, just at least let them know that they've been heard.
Yeah, for sure. I feel
Yeah.
like too, I mean, if they're also out in the field or, it's like
Yeah.
not having any sort of admin support,
Oh,
can make it
exactly.
impossible to get back. And that's something, even in our websites that we actually do set up with Wix automations to where it
Mhm.
is the contact form, it's sending an automatic email to them that can send them the
Fantastic.
next steps of like, hey, book a call via, Calendly, or here's our welcome
Fantastic.
packet, here's some more information, or here's how to create
So
an
good.
account in, Time to Pet or whatever. So it can
Mhm,
automate
mhm.
that process to at least get them started. But
Yes,
it is nice. Yeah, I mean, that touch point is crucial because if not, they're gonna be on to whoever responded the
they
quickest.
are. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and it's not always about price, It's if they feel good about you or your admin person, they are probably gonna be likely to go with you.
Mhm.
You've returned the call, you're friendly, you're helpful, you're available, So, I really recommend that.
So what are the next steps, once they do feel, fully in control of being able to schedule and they're at that point where they can handle all emails and phone calls and all of that, what's typically like the next progression for them?
Yeah, so at that point, then I would still be shadowing them. I would have them shadow me. I would shadow them to make sure that they are proficient with that. Like I do not let a manager go off on their own from their own home without really feeling solid about it. And you as a business owner know. If you don't know, they're not ready and you're not ready.
Yeah.
So, it really is simple. It's like you feel it, you know, like, and you ask them, "Do you feel ready?" Like, maybe you as the owner feel it, but you both have to feel it. And so what I would do at that point is they're basically working remotely, right? They're working from their own home. And at that point, what you want, and I had to learn this the hard way where I just had them do things initially. That was my like very first manager. Just do it. I mean, I had trained them and I felt good about them, but then it was like when I was next in the office, I had no idea what happened. I could go through the emails, but what about the phone calls and what about everything? Like, so what I did is I had them create a phone and email and reservation log. So they basically, and they did that in Google Docs where I could see it as it happened. And they would, at the very top of that doc, they would put any reservations that they had made that day. And they would put all the emails that they had returned, and they would put the email address, the time of the email that they, responded, the email, how they responded, what they did, any actions they took. It doesn't have to take a long time, but just short, sweet, succinct. And then phone calls, John Smith called, wants a pet sitter for his 2 dogs in this area. I reached out and told him you would be back in the office soon. So then when I went back into the office, I was like, I know what's going on here. I can deal with this.
Yeah.
It's not like some people just have their managers begin to enter information in the software and think that's enough. Maybe it is for them, but for me, I really needed to know like what is happening in my business each and every day. And that was a way that I could feel safe and secure turning over the reins to my manager.
Yeah.
And I could also identify mistakes that they had made too and correct them very quickly. Like all those reservations, I would double check. No matter how long they had been with me, I double checked. It only took a second in the software system just to make sure that they were aligned, that nothing fell through the cracks. Yeah.
Yeah. And how long do you think that process typically takes before you can feel super secure? Now you can go off and
Yeah.
handle.
Yeah. So, I mean, I would say it generally took anywhere from 2 to 4 months to go from just being an admin of like returning call, not doing much, right? So maybe they would do that for 2 months, maybe even 2 to 4 months, just to feel like that, to then being able to schedule, to selling our services, to solving problems, troubleshooting, dealing with emergencies. I had my manager working with me when I went away, my main manager. At that point, she had been working with me for about a year and a half, and she was solid. There are some people that take to it like a duck to water. There are
Mhm.
other people that are like, they just take a long time or they are not a good fit. They're just not a good fit. And you'll know it pretty quickly. And, trying to force somebody just because you think they'll be good at it or because you're afraid of letting go of that freedom isn't a recipe for success. Like, it's really going to be important for you as a business owner to look at, is this person doing a good job? Are they enjoying it? Are they kind of gritting their teeth, like not really wanting to do it? Are they making a lot of mistakes? I mean, people are bound to make some mistakes in the beginning, and that's why it's so important to double check. But eventually, like after a few months of doing it, they should be really solid if they're attentive to detail. And this job is not appropriate for somebody that is not attentive to detail. Too many things are at stake. The pet's well being, the clients, your reputation, your livelihood,
Mhm.
like all of it, like it matters. And I don't say that to like instill fear, but just it's important to take it seriously.
For
And
sure.
that's why it's so important to look amongst your staff first, because it's so much easier, as you said, to train someone who's behind the scenes already, maybe even knows a lot of your clients. It's also a lot easier on the clients because a lot of them probably know this person. So it's a smooth adjustment all around if it's a good fit.
Yeah, that was gonna be another question I had was, should you be preparing your clients before you're stepping back? Like, if you're doing a maternity leave or traveling.
Definitely. So what I would recommend doing in your voicemail is saying "we." Like, when you even before you've hired anybody, whether that be staff or a manager. Like, if you know that you're gonna be hiring at some point, get in the habit of saying "we," because then there's not gonna be this surprise to your clients. You know? And what I would do is with a manager, you're going to want to send an email out because that's going to be their point of reference. Like when they call, when they email, and I would introduce them, like, if they don't already know. Not everybody's gonna know the manager, even if it's a dog walker with you. That dog walker isn't helping everybody, right? So maybe you send out an email with a picture of that person, and maybe they even write a little blurb about, what they love about working with the company, how they love working with clients, whatever. But create an introduction. And when I traveled, I did let clients know because it was such a big change. I did not want I'm just a big proponent for transparency. And a lot of times fear can get in the way of transparency, like we're afraid that clients won't want to continue with us if we're not in the country because we're living elsewhere for a few months, but get over that. Like, be willing to be honest and transparent.
And most will probably prefer that anyway.
Well,
They
yeah.
prefer to
I mean, but
know.
otherwise you're kind of hiding,
Mm,
right? And then is your trip going to be truly enjoyable because you're
right.
like being sneaky? Like,
Yeah.
don't do that. Just tell the truth. Like, I am fulfilling a lifelong vision of traveling to India and Bali. Linda and Melanie are helping me fulfill that vision. And so are you by being one of my clients.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, well,
They are going to be managing. And I am so excited about this for them because they're fantastic humans. I've trained them for the last 9 months. They are ready. And if they're not ready, you let me know. I will be checking email periodically.
yeah,
But it was great. I mean, they did a fantastic job.
yeah, and it's funny,
Yeah.
I feel like we always are kind of in that fear mode of like, well, which clients are gonna be mad about this or which
I
clients are gonna
know, I
leave, but
know.
even just thinking from their perspective, it's a lot more work to go find another pet sitter.
Completely. I
When
always
it's
say
not like
that.
the yeah, it's
Yeah,
so much work. Why are they
I
gonna start
know.
over to the
They're
visit
not.
that never responded to them, right? It's like
Totally, totally. I know I have so many people who I'm coaching who are like, "I'm afraid to let this difficult client go." And I'm like, "Let them go." Or I'm afraid to set boundaries with this wonderful client. I'm like, "Set boundaries." Like,
mhm,
you're gonna be resentful if you don't.
right.
They're very unlikely to find another person, especially if it's a long-term client.
Mhm, and they
It
don't want
takes
that
a
for their pets either. Like, their
No,
pets have a routine with you, like, it's
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, people don't like change. That's just the reality of it,
Mm,
guys.
mm,
They don't like change. And so that will be one of your best friends. Like when you're fearful, just remember people don't like change. So, yes, it's a change if you're going away, out of the country, but you have replacements and hopefully
right,
you've trained them well and they're good fits and, you can do some work while you're away if you need to,
yeah, right.
and that's why I really wanted to have 2 managers so that if for some reason one had a life-threatening emergency or something, there would be somebody that would be able to step in and
Yeah, that's
help.
smart. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's smart. So before we pivot, because I wanted to talk to you about one other thing here,
Okay, great.
I'd love to like, talk about are there any metrics that we should look at in terms of, like, profitability or, like, knowing like, I guess, how do you figure out the financials of being able to, like,
Yeah.
take that back? I know you said in your case that you actually brought in more, but some of that was also a personal thing, right, with being able to rent out
Mhm.
your house, but if we're talking, like,
That's right.
maternity leave
I
or something
know.
like that, like, how do you figure out that this is a smart that you're gonna be able to make this work?
Okay, so first of all, I would start even before you're thinking about this, I would be setting aside a portion of what you're earning, like each and every week or month, a percentage that goes into like a prudent reserve, like an emergency fund. For some people, that's 5%, for some, that's 10. You know, it's better to like set aside a lower amount, than not do it. If you're like, "Oh, I only wanna set aside 10%," but you're not doing it, set aside 5% as a regular ongoing basis so that you begin to accrue money because there is a lot of feast and famine in this business. So that's thing 1, okay? That's really important to be doing. If you're not doing that, I strongly encourage you to do that. It'll give you a sense of peace and well-being and groundedness, security, all of it. When you're looking at whether you can hire a manager or not, it's going to be important to look at what's coming in and what's coming out. So a lot of people keep track of their expenses. That's just kind of a given with business. If you're not doing that, I don't know how you're surviving tax time. So likely you're doing that as a business owner. What's really important too is to be keeping track of your personal expenses separately. And then be keeping track of your business income and not just like the whole thing, but to be looking at the various services and how much are you making each month for those services. And if you can go back even like 2 years, 3 years to look at a pattern that happens, that can be very helpful for the feast and famine. And so, why do you want to look at your personal expenses and your business expenses? Because if you're just like eyeballing your business expenses and your income to see if you can pull this off, this hiring a manager, your numbers aren't complete because your personal life is there too. What's happening with that? How much do you have to come up with each month for your life? What's your, monthly nut for your life? What's your monthly nut for your business? We're talking like every month, and maybe you need to average it out. So, this isn't something I have a lot of people who ask me, how much do I need to make in order to be able to hire a manager? Well, I can't help you with that because, I can if you have the numbers, we can like crunch it and see, do you have enough? But realistically, you're gonna be looking at, like, at minimum, probably paying $20 an hour, maybe more, depending on your location, minimum wage, all of that. So, what some people do to assist them in terms of the cost is they could hire a VA, you know? But again, that's not somebody within your company, so they might not be able to do a great job. Some people hire it out. Some people hire from the Philippines where they can pay $5 an hour, and they've had great success with that. Like, I have not known anybody that has had great success with that, honestly. What I have noticed is when they're hiring within the company, that's usually when they hire somebody who is a fantastic fit because they've worked with them, they've seen how they work, they know their communication style. You are likely going to have to pay them more than if they're a service provider, but it's going to be worth it. Like, it's really important to wrap your brain around this person eventually is going to help make me more money because they're going to be returning client calls quickly or emails. Eventually they're going to be able to sell the services to the clients, and that's something that you're going to help them with. And even if you feel like you're not a good salesperson, if your business is generating a good profit, you're doing something right. And it may be like a very natural skill, but you can begin to teach that skill to whoever you're hiring. So, if you are totally burned out and fried and you're not making that much money, I would be looking at hiring an admin assistant rather than a manager. Whenever you have that title of manager, you're going to have to pay more. That's just the way it works, right? If you hire a virtual assistant, that could even be a service provider, could be a virtual assistant, you will, likely be able to pay them less than you would a manager.
And that can still grant you more freedom too, depending on what your goals are,
Oh,
right? If you're just trying to reduce
completely.
hours or
Yes,
yeah.
yes, just create some space. And
Mhm.
what I've noticed with some of the people that I coach is that even if they begin to get like 2 hours 3 times a week, that's all theirs, that creates a level of peace, freedom, focus, clarity. They have more energy for their business. Some even fall in love with their business again. They've gone from wanting to divorce it, like, "Oh, I don't like it," to falling madly in love with it again, like remembering why they love it. Like if we're working so hard all the time, what's the point?
Mhm.
Right? That is not a love affair.
Yeah.
That's like that's hell.
Yeah.
That's hell.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I cannot have a conversation with you without talking mindset. So I would love we talked a little bit about how there's a lot that comes up in terms of delegation, releasing control in our business. I'd love if you could share any advice for people who are struggling with, I can't let go of that control. Like how do you get past
Yeah.
that?
Well, to ask yourself some questions like, what am I afraid of? What am I afraid of will happen? Like, what's the worst thing that would happen if I let go of control or if I hire somebody? And it might be I'll get a bad review or a number of bad reviews, which is that's not a good thing, right? But sometimes when we identify our fears, then we're able to address them. So it's like, okay, if you're afraid of getting bad reviews or, the person not doing a good job, what could prevent you? What could help you to turn that around so that that doesn't happen? What would be feeling great about the person you hire? Doesn't mean nothing bad's going to happen. You can't control that. What you can control is what kind of what kind of person you hire, how you hire them, how you train them. All of these things are within your control.
That's true because I
But
feel like a lot of times when you do hire sorry to interrupt, but
it's okay.
when you do hire somebody and something bad happens, I don't know if you've noticed this, but it seems like they kind of knew that that was going to happen. Like, it
Oh,
was almost like,
totally.
yeah, those red
Yeah.
flags were there and I
I
ignored it,
know. I
and
know. Yes, and sometimes they're even yellow flags. Like I would say yellow flags can sometimes be as disturbing as red flags
mhm,
and important to pay attention to. So if you are interviewing this person, or if, a lot of people don't correct mistakes as they happen either. They're afraid to be a boss. They're afraid to bring attention to something that wasn't done quite right. But that is a learning opportunity right there.
yeah,
So, fear can really get in the way of having your dream business. And it's like, how can you get out of your own way? Because we create the fear
mhm,
in our head. And asking yourself questions can be a great start. You know, if I were to hire somebody, how could I hire a really great person? What are some steps I could take that would help me feel fantastic about that person? Let's say you're hiring a pet sitter, do a background check, calm your nervous system with that background check.
yeah,
Yeah. Sometimes it's really nuts and bolts. It's not even mindset. It's like take the
true,
actions that are needed, and that will help you
yeah,
feel more comfortable. Like if you are feeling afraid, something isn't right. And it may not be that person that's in front of you that you're interviewing, it might be your own fearful thoughts,
Mhm.
and only you can identify that.
Right. I know for me too, because we're kind of in the process of we've been hiring more and that sort of thing, and
Mhm.
I have designers on my team now and stuff like that. And so for
Great.
me, that was something that I was always worried about is like, oh, what if this happens? What if this happens? And so what I did is created a document that was like, if this happens, do this. If this, it's like,
Yes.
here's the
Yes.
document so you know how to handle certain situations. And you can think of
Beautiful.
situations that have never happened before. Like it's like, but this
Yeah.
might happen. Like
Yes,
here's what we can do.
exactly. You know what? That is a good point. So in the manager manual that I have, that I used with my own managers, and a lot of pet business owners have gotten it as well, it's like I have scenarios because there are so many scenarios. Now, you cannot identify every single scenario, but there are some that have happened a few times that are kind of to be expected, right? So how can you avoid that, and or how can you manage that if it does happen?
Right.
The other thing when you are interviewing people, even if it's somebody that's already working for you, but that is stepping into a new role, it's going to be important to ask them, like, how would you deal with this? Like, to ask open ended questions, not yes or no questions, because everybody knows the answer to a yes or no question, right?
Mhm.
Really, an interview is about gathering information to determine if this is a right fit or not
Mhm.
for you, for your business. And so, you look at scenarios that have happened for you as a business owner and ask, like, what would you do if X happened? How would you handle that? And they may be like, I have no idea, but ask a couple other questions to see if they are able to kind of think on their feet. Because part of being a manager is being able to roll with it. Like, especially in the pet industry, things come up. Weird things, very bizarre things. Yeah. And those who are pet business owners are probably nodding their heads right now, like, oh my gosh, I had this weird thing come up. So you can't identify everything, but you want somebody that can handle strange situations because you, as the business owner, may not be reachable in that moment. And it may need, an urgent solution. Doesn't mean it's going to be the perfect one, but at least that they can kind of, figure things out and have common sense.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. And this might actually be a little more of a personal question, I guess I have for you
Yeah.
in terms of like
Okay.
in terms of handling this sort of new dynamic of giving tasks to other people is even within your own team, for them to know
Mhm.
that you're gonna be stepping back and working less, I feel like sometimes there
Yeah.
can be that dynamic of like, now I'm trying to make money without working.
Exactly. Yes, yes, yes.
How do you handle that? 'Cause I'm
Oh
like,
my
I don't want you
gosh,
to
I
keep
know. I know,
not
I
working.
know. I felt a lot of guilt about that. I think that's a very natural human feeling. And some people are like, "Woohoo, I'm making money without working,"
Mhm.
If you're doing that, good for you. That was not my experience. But what I also the way I kind of calmed that thought, it kind of guilt, you know, is I had worked in my business for a number of years. I had done the heavy lifting,
Mhm.
and it was time for me to step away. And whenever I hired somebody, this was not in the beginning, okay? I was not a good boss in the beginning, but I learned how to be a good boss, how to um, not micromanage, And so after like probably after like the first 2 or 3 years of hiring, I began hiring people who could self-manage. And so they were already in some ways, at least the staff members that I had, not necessarily the managers, but they were already beginning to they managed like kind of from the beginning themselves.
Mhm.
And I wanted them to have autonomy. And I got really good at identifying who has that skill set and who doesn't in the interview. And, in the application, I had specific questions that, I would ask them that would help me identify if they were good at that or not. So, you know, you may still have guilt, but it might be kind of similar to whatever arises when you do have time, when you've gone from 60 to 0. Like, those are same flavors,
Yeah.
right? It's
Yeah.
like, um, maybe there's this belief that you have that you don't deserve to have rest,
Mhm.
relaxation, or fun. And you can feel like you're a foreigner in a foreign country, like when you aren't working and you have a few hours, you're like, what do I do with myself? Or you have this expanse of time where you're in another country and you don't have work as a distraction, right? Who am I without my work?
Mhm.
And for a lot of pet business owners, they don't know if they've been doing it quite a while. And so that's something to begin to unpack. Like, a question to ask, a question to journal write. Like, who am I without my work? If work, was taken away from me quite suddenly, and some people had that during the pandemic, right? They were like a deer in the headlights. Not just about the money, but like, who am I? It was a big existential crisis for a
Yeah.
lot of people, not just pet business owners, right? Who am I without my work?
Yeah, it's a good question to ask.
Yeah, it can bring up a lot of anxiety,
Mhm.
but sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that means that it needs to be addressed and looked at.
Yeah, and maybe it's a good opportunity because a lot of times it isn't it for people who have regular jobs, in corporate or things like that, that is always the first question that people ask, right? Like, "Oh, well, what do you do?" Like, it's not like, "Who are
Uh-huh.
you?" It's like, "What do
I
you do?"
know, I
But
know.
if you're able to kind of separate yourself
Yeah.
from that, then that question does
Uh-huh.
get asked and you get to explore it a little more, right?
I know. You know what's funny? I started about 5 years ago when people ask me what I do, I say, "Do you mean for work or play?"
That's nice.
'Cause it's like, why do we get put in this box, of our career or our business? I mean, and I used to lead with that because I felt very proud of what I did, and, but it was also a way to kind of hide, and I didn't have, like, a fulfilling personal life, so, it was easy. Like, I love that question. I was like, "Bring it on. I'll tell you what I do." But, as I started to cultivate my personal life, I began to realize, you know, I would like people to know more about me than just my work. And I know more about me than just my work now. And that's a whole person.
True.
Yeah.
Yep.
So you might want to try that at a party next time.
Good.
When somebody asks you, like, what do you do? If they say, what do you do for work? But a lot of people
Right.
just say, what do you do? And
Right.
it's like, do you mean for work?
Yes. I love that.
And they
That's
go,
good.
they're like a
That's good.
bird. They're like, they cock their head like, oh,
Like, what
what?
else would it be?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But then the coin drops. They
Yeah.
go, oh yeah, what do you do for fun?
Yeah. And that's sometimes
Yeah,
more fun to talk about too.
it totally is. I mean, we work, especially if you're working a lot, bring vibrancy into your conversations.
Mhm.
Like, you already know how to talk about your work. Not you, but business owners tend to know. And so it's like, let's dive a little deeper with each other.
Yeah. I love that. All right, before we wrap up, and I know that we have a spot for you to be able to share a little bit more about how people can find you and all of your fabulous resources you have. But before we do that, we end every guest interview with a question on topic of burnout and stress. So I would love to know your top recommended mindful or stress reducing practice you have in your life that you would recommend for our listeners.
Lying on the ground completely, just like, get on the grass,
Oh,
put your whole body on the ground, set the timer if you need to for 5 minutes, and just let the earth take whatever you're holding. It wants it, it can handle it. And just 5 minutes of doing that can be incredibly powerful. And if you're not able to do that for whatever reason, because it's snowing or, you know, you're in the desert and it's too hot, you could do it on your carpet in your living room, and it's an act of surrender too. It's like, you can take a deep breath. You can let go. Like, that can be so much easier sometimes than like sitting cross legged and meditating.
Mhm.
It's
Well,
like
and there's
just,
science
yeah.
behind grounding on the
Oh,
earth too. It's not
totally.
it's not just woo-woo.
Earthing.
Yeah.
No, I know, they call it earthing, yeah,
Yeah.
and, if you can't do that for whatever reason, like putting your whole body on the earth, walk around barefoot because 'cause that'll help too.
Yeah.
But that's something that I really recommend, and if you can't do that, if you can't lie on your carpet or whatever, the other thing you can do is, like, stare at a flower, find some nature to just connect with.
Yeah, that's great advice. I love that. Can you share before we go a little bit more about how people can find you and your resources? I will also be sure I know that you mentioned your manager's manual, so I'm gonna have that in the
Mhm.
show notes too, but please feel free to share anything else where people can find you.
Yeah, so you can find me at Six Figure Pet Business Academy. It's all spelled out. You can also go to sfpbacademy.com. That's a shorter version. I'm at Prosperous Pet Business, so that's the podcast that I have. And I have free resources on my Six Figure Pet Business Academy site. So you can go to the free stuff page and get various downloadable booklets that'll help you with your pet business. And I like to give out a lot of free resources for those who are struggling financially. And, anybody is willing to partake of those. So I welcome you to check that out.
Awesome.
And
Thank you so
I'm
much.
on Instagram too, Pet Biz Coach. Yeah.
Perfect. Awesome. And we'll have all of those links in the show notes so you guys can click directly below. You don't have to memorize any of that. But thank you so much, Kristen. It was such a pleasure chatting with
Oh,
you again. It had been a while, so
I
it's so nice to
know.
catch up and chat all things
Yeah.
dream life and having a business that supports that life.
Yes. Wonderful to connect with you. Take care.
Thank you so much.